It's episode 107 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Before we get into today's great episode with editor extraordinaire David Gatewood, I'd like to tell you about a couple of sponsors that we have. The Association for Independent Publishing Professionals, the AIPP, is an organization where people that support the indie author community can band together and can find new clients and can showcase what they do to the people that can use that. So if you are an indie author and you're looking for people to help you, or if you provide services to the indie author community, go to AIPPonline.org. We're also brought to you by Third Scribe. Third Scribe can help authors connect with their audience. If you are an author and you want to do the important things like writing instead of managing a website, go to thirdscribe.com. They'll get you all fixed up and help you meet your full potential. Be sure to subscribe at iTunes and on YouTube as well. Like the episodes, subscribe, helps other people find it. Now on to our interview with David Gatewood. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm very excited today to have David Gatewood on the show. As you know, we've been doing some shows where we talk more about craft, and I had been wanting to have an episode where we really talked about editing, and I could think of no one better than David Gatewood to come on. So thank you, David, for taking time out of your very busy day to come on the show.
Thanks, Hank, for having me.
Before we get started and talking about editing, how did you get started doing this? You have a really interesting story, and we touched on it briefly in an episode that we did for Tales of Tinfoil, and where we did an author roundtable. But how did you get started as an editor? If I understand right, you didn't intend to do this, did you?
I absolutely did not. In fact, I was sort of dragged kicking and screaming into it a little bit. Yeah, because I was always, ever since I was a kid, it was always, oh, David is good at math. You know, so that's how I always saw myself, right? In college, that's what I studied. I was in a PhD program for a little bit, which I didn't finish. But, you know, and then I was working as an analyst, lots of Excel. I was at a big bank and doing PowerPoint presentations with lots of charts and graphs, and that seemed to be my career, you know, for the last 20 years. And then I really don't exactly know why I did this, but I'd read Wool, and I'd read a review, and it was like, oh, you know what I love about this book is it doesn't have any mistakes in it. And I thought to myself, yeah, it does. And for some reason I wanted to make that person right, I guess. So I was like, I read it a second time, and this time I flagged stuff on my Kindle as I went. And then there's a way to sort of export that into a document, and I wrote notes on it. And I sent it to Hugh Howey, who I didn't know. He wasn't even very famous back then. And he thanked me and made some fixes. And then for his next book, he said, hey, do you want to be a beta reader? I said, sure. And then the next book after that, he's like, you know, maybe you want to do a little bit more. And the next book after that, a little bit more. And he sort of pulled me into it. It was about a year after that I said, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this banking thing anyway. And I left that job and put up a website and started editing full time.
Wow. Was that a huge leap of faith to do that?
It was pretty scary, yeah. You know, I've got kids and a mortgage and all that.
Right.
And I had a good paycheck and benefits, and I was just going to try to do this thing all on my own. But, you know, what I had done is I'd started doing some editing while I was still at the other job, just to make sure that I could do it. I spent a vacation doing it to make sure I liked doing it full time. And I did, and it's worked out great. It's been like 3 years now, I think. Almost.
Was this ever something that you had any inkling about? I mean, you said that everybody said, oh, David's good at math. But you know, what about your language skills and stuff? Did that ever kind of hit you as, okay, I'm also good at this?
This really took me by surprise. I mean, I was good at language skills. At one time, not long after college, I had a job grading high school essays for some sort of required state exam. You know, that's the closest I'd gotten to it. And that job was terrible.
Wow.
You got paid 10 cents per essay, so you had to fly through these things. But you know, and a lot of people that I worked with at the bank, they're like, "Wow, that's so weird. I mean, why are you doing that?" But when I look back on it and I think about it, whenever I got my performance reviews at my old analyst job, where I always got great marks was on communication. You know, you do a good job with taking the data and making a sensible story out of it. And so a lot of the skills are really transferable, even though it didn't seem like they were, I think.
Do you write for yourself?
I don't, no. Sometimes people say, "Hey, why don't you write?" But I mean, the main reason is I don't have the interest, I guess. You know, people say you shouldn't write unless you really want to. Well, then I definitely shouldn't.
Right. I know Hugh wouldn't mind us talking about this for just a minute, but what sorts of things did you find with wool? Was it just spelling, punctuation stuff, grammar stuff, or was it more kind of story detail oriented?
When the first version of the book, nobody died, and I said, let's change the whole thing. So it's pretty much a complete revamp. And the first book was terrible. But
and then you had him kill everybody.
Yeah. Seriously, it was mostly just small grammar things. I mean, there are a couple places where there was something that maybe was a little bit more substantive, but it was mostly just copy edits.
Gotcha. So you became an editor. You decided to go full time. You know, looking at your website, which is lonetrout.com, you have this amazing landing page where there are book covers from books that you have edited, and as you scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll through these book covers, it's a veritable who's who of indie publishing. That's amazing. When you got started, when you did this full time, did it take you long to fill up your schedule?
When I started it, I almost immediately. So I asked you. I said, "Hey, could I use can I put your books out here as a reference?" And he said, "Sure." And then he went and posted something somewhere. It's like, "Hey, David Gatewood's available for editing." And so immediately, basically, he got me a bunch of clients to get me started. So I really owe Hugh a lot. He not only got me into the business, then he helped me get it started. So I filled up pretty quickly. And it doesn't actually take all that many clients to stay busy, because since it takes a week or two to do a book, and you've got some people now who are putting out 3 books a year, it's not hard to stay busy.
Yeah. So if an average novel, especially ebooks, tend to land anywhere between 50 and 100,000 words, is that about typical?
Yeah.
How long does it take you to go through and do a first edit on a, say, 50 to 60,000 word novel?
50, 60,000 words, that'd be about a week.
About a week. Now, do you do one at a time, or are you juggling multiple projects at a time?
So I'm always doing one first edit at a time. And then, I send it back to the author, and they're going to do some things and send it back to me and back and forth. So that second round stuff, second and third, is always ongoing while I'm working on the next project.
Gotcha. Authors tend to, when you really meet a prolific author who's, like you said, cranking out 3 novels a year or so, they tend to have very rigid schedules and really treat it like a full-time job. And it sounds like that with your workload, you have to keep a pretty rigid schedule also.
Yeah, I've got everything charted out right now, like through February. So yeah, it's trying to get it week by week and make sure it all works out. And I do my best. In the end, it's hard for somebody to predict when they're going to have the book ready that they're writing for November. And so I'll say, all right, we're going to do this on November 8th. It doesn't ever work out that way. And in the end, I end up pretty light one week and pretty heavy another, but we work it out in the end.
What's the saying? Best laid plans of mice, men, and indie authors.
Yeah.
Speaking of Hugh, and Hugh has been instrumental in educating a lot of people, getting them the information that they need to know that this is a viable thing that people can do, and we're all deeply thankful for the work that he's done. But watching Hugh over the several years, you could really see the path and the journey of an author going from a guy who's just kind of bootstrapping everything in his spare bedroom, to someone with enormous success. And Hugh really encouraged people and empowered people to take that bootstrapping mentality, that DIY mentality, do everything you can yourself. And then as a last resort, hire out things to people. And I think a lot of indie authors, because they're doing this all themselves, don't really understand the importance of hiring out some things. Maybe they think, I can do this all myself. Maybe having a developmental editor or a line editor isn't that important. I really need to get the work out. And then we see what happened with Hugh and with Wool, and that though he had done a phenomenal job, he also could use the help of someone else. What would you say to an author who says, I think I could do this all myself? What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, it's possible that they're right, but it's very unlikely. Hugh actually is a weird example because he's one guy who I really don't do much editing. That's because he does something like 20 editing passes of his own before he ever gives anything to me. And because he's just extremely talented. But that is a very rare situation. I think particularly if this is your first book, you don't know what you don't know. And right. you need to have someone look at it. And then you'll find out if you gave it to an editor and there wasn't much for them to do, well, now you know that you didn't really need that. But you're probably not going to find that out to be the case. So you should at least try. It's, I think I universally find out that authors, think that their work will need less editing than it does, even more experienced ones. And that's just natural because when you look at your own work, you don't see the same things that someone else will see. And so it looks good because your brain is skipping past a lot of stuff because you know what you meant. You give it to someone else and they're going to see it a different way.
I've heard it said, and I don't know if this is true or not, but someone told me that when you're editing your own work, that when you read over your manuscript and there's an error, and if you read that 3 times, you'll no longer see that error. Your brain just comes to accept it or whatever. Do you think that's a common problem, that people just can't see their errors after so long? You kind of get so deep in the weeds that's one benefit of an editor is that they can stand back and have that unbiased look.
It's got to be one. I mean, no one can catch everything. I mean, I've even read something that says, the best editor is going to only find 95% of the errors, which leaves quite a lot, actually. And which is why some people hire a second editor or a proofreader. When it's your own work, it's going to be that much tougher. I think the bigger problem is not so much things like typos and dropped words, but more that when you know what you meant to say, you think that you've said it. You're going to read your sentence, which to me as an outside reader is unclear and has an ambiguous pronoun. But you know what you meant, so you don't see that. Or there's an action scene and I can't figure out what's going on. From your perspective, it's going to seem that it's very clear. You just need someone on the outside to look at that. If you can't hire an editor, you should at least get a friend to do it. But there is a big difference between having a friend looking at something who is number one, afraid to tell you anything critical, and number two, probably not going to spend the time to pick apart every single paragraph versus getting an editor. So definitely get someone outside to look at it if you can't get an editor, but preferably get an editor.
That's a great point, that that you have all the context in your head, whereas an editor doesn't have that built-in context, and so they can tell if you have spelled this out well and did the proper world building and all that. That's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is a lot of people, I think, that come for the first time to an editor are really expecting a copy editor, which means fixing objective issues with spelling and grammar and punctuation. Most of what I end up doing is line editing, which is more about clarity and flow and pacing of the sentences. And I think that's something that's much harder to see in your own work because of that issue.
I think it was Susan K. Quinn that posted on Facebook the other day that she and her son were reading, and he was reading, I think it was Jurassic Park.
Yes.
Yeah, and the amount of just horrid errors that was in this book. So this is not just an indie publishing problem. This is, and it amazes me, a book that's been published, I don't know, is it close to 30 years? It's still out there with that many errors. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, I don't understand how that happens. So I'd understand it more today because I hear from editors who either now work or used to work with the big publishing houses that, budget constraints, they don't have as much time to put as much attention into books as they used to. But Jurassic Park, like you said, was 30 years ago.
Right.
And this is Michael Crichton. You would have thought there'd be 50 people at the publishing house who wanted to just read the book, even if they weren't assigned to it. And the kind of errors that her son called out were obvious. So I don't know what happened there. That's pretty weird.
Yeah, that's amazing. So
it's true. People say, there is still an attitude out there among some people that says, self-publishing means poor quality. And that's definitely, I don't see, for people who actually hire an editor as a freelancer or hire one at a publishing house, I don't really see a big difference.
Yeah.
It's books been edited. That's what matters.
What's amazing now is when I'm looking for guests for this show, a lot of times I'm just browsing through my Kindle, and I do this every night when I'm laying in bed, and I'll just start going through the Kindle store, and I'll look for things that interest me, and it has been about 50-50. That I'll find a book, I'll download a sample, or if it's in Kindle Unlimited, I'll download the whole book and start reading through. And I don't even look to see who the publisher is. And it's about 50-50 that the books that I really love are either Big Five or they're indie. And the line is so blurry now. I think some of the indie published books, the covers are as good or better than a lot of the Big Five, and it's just crazy. It's getting to be where there's no clear dividing line. And you have been there to see this kind of firsthand, this wave crest. Do you have any thoughts about the rise of indie publishing and how it's becoming a serious contender?
It seems to me it's already. Look, I don't think, the big publishing houses are going to go away or anything.
Yeah.
There's always going to be room for those few big authors that are going to be writing all the bestsellers, and you need to have something on the shelf at the drugstore, right? But the reader doesn't care who published the book.
Right.
Like you said, you don't look at it. I don't look at it. I don't pay any attention to it. That'd be really weird, wouldn't it, to be looking at a book and let me see who the publisher is. Oh, Random House. No. That'd be just bizarre.
Right.
You just want a good book.
Right.
And you find a good author, and then you stick with them for a while. And then you see what comes up in your also boughts on Amazon or something. So with the people I work with, most of them are self-published. Some of them are trying to get an edit before they they shop to agents. But I know that it continues to be something that authors think about a lot. And I point them to the usual sources to get advice on that. But my personal opinion is I don't see why you'd go to a traditional publisher these days.
Yeah.
Unless you really want to have that paperback at CVS.
That really is the lone holdout now. The Kindle and to a lesser degree the Nook and iPads, I guess have really leveled the playing field. But that last holdout is being able to pick up a paperback at CVS or at the airport or whatever. I hope that there becomes a delivery method for that, like the Kindle has. I don't know what that would be, but I think that if that happened, that there clearly would be no difference anymore. So let's hope that happens.
Yeah, and you can already you get print books with CreateSpace.
Exactly.
So it's just that they're not on. You don't have the distribution network to get them on the store shelves.
Right.
That's the difference.
Yeah, and there's a gaping hole there just waiting for someone to fill. I don't know why Amazon hasn't had, and maybe they're planning on that or something. I don't know, but that seems like a market that's just waiting to be filled. That distribution channel to get indie books out with a wide distribution. But anyway. What kind of things, when someone sends you a manuscript and you've never worked with this person before, and you get a fresh look at this person, what are some of the most common things that you find from with people that send their manuscript to you?
That's a really hard question to answer because there's 100 different things, and each author has chosen 5 of them. So if that makes sense, there aren't like these are if everyone fixed these 5 things, they'd be set. And you go through an author's work, and what I often do when I finish a manuscript is I'll also write up, here are some recurring things that you did. Don't just pay attention to my edits, but these are some things you might want to work on the next book. And those are different for each author. But if I have to answer, I'd say, right, first of all, everyone has certain words or phrases that they overuse. And most authors who've done this for a while, they know what they are, and that's something they go through. There's actually some programs now, like Grammarly, I think, helps you identify whether you've got something, a word or phrase appearing a whole lot. And I think that sort of stuff is useful. One thing that bugs me a lot I see is what I call twitchiness, where your characters are always smiling and nodding and shrugging. And it just seems like, settle down, guys.
Well, I wonder if some of that comes from, having drilled into you, show, don't tell. So you think, well, I'm gonna give him a little motion here. But you're saying that authors tend to use that same motion over and over and over again?
Yeah, it's not to sound Weasley, but it's all about moderation. Yes, some of that is good. Too much of it is bad. Too little is bad. So it seems like, though, there's some authors who are afraid to say he said and she said as dialogue tags. Mm-hmm. And so this is where all that nodding comes in, and it'll say, hello there, Jack nodded. Nice to meet you, she smiled. Instead of just saying he said and she said. And I don't know if those words just seem I don't know, too pedestrian. But to me, they're like stage directions. It's like if you're reading a play and off the side it says Romeo, and then here's what he says. That's pretty boring to have Romeo, in the side, but that's basically all it is, and your eye just flips past it. It's a tag, don't worry about that. But if you have Romeo nodded, that would start to get distracting.
I've heard people come down on both sides of the dialogue tag. Some people will say, like you did, that the he said, she said, those things just eventually disappear. You don't even read those. Is is there a good way to balance the that constant dialogue tags with giving them something that distinguishes their emotion in the moment? Is this something that authors should be working to strive harder in their dialogue to bring out, other than giving stage direction?
So ideally, you can write something where you don't need any tag and everyone knows who's talking.
Right.
But when you've got more than two people and they're sort of going around the room saying things, it's pretty much unavoidable, unless each one has some crazy accent or something, which would be annoying, I think. I hate accents in books when they're written out. You know, I just can't read them.
Well, and you have to do it very carefully, or you can come across, very, like a jerk, if you don't do it carefully. That's the nicest way I could say that.
But so, I don't mean to say that you can't have your characters have action tags. Vary them up and make sure that they're appropriate. If you're using nodded and smiled and shrugged, those are the three big ones. Or shook their head. Just because the person said no, you don't have to say they shook their head, And don't have them nod in a situation where no one asked them a yes sort of a question. Right. Make sure that they're all making sense and that they're adding something to the scene.
Right. You mentioned, not to keep harping on Hugh, but you mentioned that he does several edits before sending a book to you. I know also people like Nick Cole will do several runs and even read a book out loud. And I picked up that cue from Nick, and I do that before doing anything with my book, is I read it out loud and try to act out the characters when I can. And I've found several things like that just by reading it, and you say, well, that just doesn't sound right. That sounds stupid. Nobody would ever say that. So that's a very real tool to use. Do you have any recommendations for what people could do? Just polishing that first draft before it's ready to send to a real editor.
So I think the reading out loud trick sounds great. So I'm not a writer, so my advice is all a little bit secondhand, but the kinds of things I see, I often feel like if you read this out loud, you would have seen how weird that sounded. Especially with dialogue, I think you say it out loud and you're like, wait, that sounds, I'm talking like a lawyer instead of a lover or something. And that'll help you with the flow and the pacing of the sentences as well. But, once you have some idea of the sorts of issues that you have in your writing, then I think I could give you some advice. All right, do a pass where you're looking at this. Until then, not being an author, I'm not sure how I would advise people.
Do you edit much fantasy, like epic fantasy and things like that?
Most of what I get is science fiction, but that's not because I've said I don't want to do fantasy. I like fantasy, and I have done some of it. Yeah.
Dialogue is very different. If you're talking about a medieval fantasy or some alternate world epic fantasy, that's that dialogue tends to be more formal and less contractions and things like that. So I guess also being very aware of your genre also probably plays a role into how you write those things. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, I would agree. I actually I have a tough time getting comfortable with characters who don't use contractions. It sounds so stiff. But if that's how the people talk in your world, then yeah, you go with it.
Have you ever, do you ever send edits back to an author and they say, no, this is, I'm not changing this? Do you ever have anybody that just stands by their original work?
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, well, they're supposed to. I mean, this is supposed to be a bit of more me providing advice. The author should be making all the decisions about this is what I wanted to say. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to mark all this stuff. And if you misspelled a word and I corrected it, and you want to go with the misspelling, all right, I'm going to push back and say that's the wrong spelling of the word, because that's obvious, right? That's objectively wrong. But if I said, I think this flows better this other way, and you say, no, I like it the first way, well, we'll go with your way, right? So I really like when the author's obviously going through and picking at things and saying, all right, I see what you're trying to do here, but I was trying to do this instead. And it's a bit more of a collaboration to get things the way that he or she likes it. And I'll push back if I feel strongly, but for the most part, once, if you've seen what I suggested and you rejected it, well, we know where you stand, and we'll go with your version.
They say a good editor helps you as an author sound more like you, and they say that if you have a good editor, you can't really see the work of the editor. It just sounds like the author is saying what they intended to say. Is that a struggle, staying out of the way, so to speak, and helping to kind of raise the author up? Do you ever find yourself going, maybe maybe this is a little heavy-handed, or like how do you serve the author without leaving your fingerprints all over it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's I wouldn't say it's a struggle, but it's a constant balance. Yeah. And once I've done a book with an author, then I have a feel for, how deep they want me to go. But the first time through, I'm never sure. There are some things that, like I said, they're objectively wrong. You misspelled the word. Right. Obviously, I'm going to fix that. But there's another one where, all right, the sentence is actually just fine as is, but I think it'd be a little bit better if you join these two sentences with an and instead of them being separate sentences. That sort of thing. Or maybe I'm making a heavier edit. It's like, I think we need to rearrange this section. I have sometimes gone too far. What I try to do is go a little too far, because an edit that I've made, the author can reject.
Right.
If I didn't make the edit at all, they never get a chance to do anything with it. So I try to push a little bit farther and then hope that they'll push back and let me know where they would have rather I drew the line.
It sounds like the ideal situation is to develop a relationship with your editor so that you both understand each other's voice and you have that trust relationship that's built up, and you know that that your editor is out for your best interest, and that they're gonna that both of you are gonna serve the book, and that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I do think it makes sense if you hire an editor, you're not necessarily sure you're happy with it, hire another one, and you'll get a different result. It's not like there's one thing that the editor's going to do. You find someone who works with you well and stick with them. There's something about just, it's hard for you to state exactly what you need, so you just have to try and see what they give you and see if that's what you were looking for. And you do see authors tend to be pretty loyal to their editor once they find someone they like.
Well, yeah, it's first off, it's a terrifying thing to take your work that you've spent 6 months on and then give it to someone and say, please, red ink this all over. It's a pretty terrifying thing, but once you get past that, it really becomes a level of trust that you just don't get anywhere else. So that's really important. What's your process usually like? You do a first edit, send it to the author, and then what happens from there?
Yeah, so I go through the whole thing, mark it up. Sometimes most of it is with track changes in Word, and I've just made the changes there. Sometimes I have comments in the margin to explain what I'm doing if it's maybe unclear why I did something. Other places I'll put a comment to say such and such is needed here, but I'm basically asking the author to do it. like if maybe material that needs to be added. And then I send it to them, and they go through it. Some authors go through it super fast. Some of them take a couple of months. Review everything, accept what they like, reject what they don't, make revisions. They almost always make additional revisions. Then they send it back to me, and I look at all the revisions. So the second time around, I don't just start at the beginning and read through the whole thing. I just look at everything they've changed and make sure that it all still works. It's very common that in the process of editing, you add new errors. You get all that markup on the page. You can't even see that you've got 2 periods in a row or something weird, or that you just did some crazy copy paste thing. You've got a Franken sentence that makes no sense. And so, yeah, it's good to go back through once more and make sure about that. Usually, I'll then send it back again. We'll do it one more time, and that's about it. But we'll do as many passes as it takes until the author's happy with it.
And then I'm assuming when all that's done, just a good proofreading over it to look for those stray periods and things like that happen in the editing is always helpful, I would imagine.
Yeah, so that's, like, for me, that would be a separate service to do a full proofread afterwards. I do think it's a good thing to hire someone to do a proofread, but the sorts of errors that are left at that point are usually not as significant. I know a lot of authors don't do that step. Budget is a concern, obviously.
Sure. Do you approach different genres differently? For instance, I know you edit a lot of science fiction. That seems to be kind of one of the big indie publishing heavy hitters is science fiction. But also romance is big in the indie community. Fantasy also, and then you've even edited some middle grade. Do you approach those differently at all?
Not in a big way. Unless it's, say, something like a developmental edit, then you need to sort of know what are the standards of the genre and the expectations of the reader. But for a line edit, it's less about the genre and more about just understanding the author's voice and making sure that you can keep that consistent and that it sounds right. I guess for middle grade, there's a little bit more that I have to make sure that I'm not suggesting unusual vocabulary or something. But it's not too different.
When you take on a new project and a new author, do you just take the book and edit it? Do you have a conversation with the author in the beginning? How do you get to know the author and their work?
The most part, I just take the book and I edit it. Like if I haven't ever worked with someone before, I have them send me a sample of a couple chapters in advance, and that's so that I can get a feel for what they're doing and estimate a cost and all that sort of thing. But that's still pretty small. I mean, a couple chapters is not going to tell me a whole lot. So that I have a few basic questions to ask people about what they're interested in, but otherwise I just go to it and then keep my fingers crossed.
Are you still taking on new clients?
I am, except that I don't have any bandwidth right now. So I haven't explicitly said I'm not taking on new clients, but I am booked right now up until early next year. And I know that my existing clients are going to have more books coming in, so I don't exactly have room for anyone else at this point, I think.
That's a great problem to have.
It is, yeah. The one bad thing is that, I do like working with first-time authors. It's kind of a different thing. I get to be in more of a teaching role, I guess. So I like to work some of those in. But it's nice to have lots of recurring clients.
So are you saying that if there's a new author that really thinks they have something groundbreaking, to send you a sample and see if you can work them in?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, man. You also, like we talked about earlier, curated an anthology last year called Tales of Tinfoil. What was that experience like for you?
So I really have liked doing anthologies. I worked with Samuel Peralta on some of the ones in the Future Chronicles. I worked with Michael Bunker on Synchronic and Susan May on From the Side. And Patrice Fitzgerald on Dark Beyond the Stars. So part of it is fun that I got to collaborate with all these talented people. Even the one that I did more on my own, Tales of Tinfoil, I got to, reach out to a lot of authors that I respected and see what they could do with it. And I was pretty excited with the result. It's a different sort of a book than what I'm usually working with. It's not really science fiction. But I'm pretty proud of it.
Will there be a second edition?
I have been saying that there would be ever since the first one. But as I was just saying, my calendar's so full. I'm going to have to stop waiting to see when I happen to have some time and make the time, because it's obviously not going to work out.
They say that there's never a good time to have a child. That if you always wait until life is perfect, you'll never have children. It's probably a lot like that.
Yeah, it's like that. So I'll get to work on
that. And when you do, you have an open door on the show here to come talk about it.
All right.
But speaking of anthologies, though, do you approach editing a short story differently than a novel? Of course, the author approaches it differently because you've got a narrower window that you can, you can't have long world building scenes and all this. You really have to get down to the point and get this encapsulated story and get right to the reader's heart quickly. Do you approach editing those differently?
Not significantly. It's tougher because I don't have as much time to sort of get my head into the author's voice. And like if you're doing an anthology and now you're working with 12 different people, 12 different voices. So it, from my perspective, it's a harder job to do 12 short stories instead of one long book. But the editing itself is pretty similar. I think I probably defer maybe a little bit more to the author in those cases, since I haven't quite got a feel for their voice in the larger sense. And then there are also some things that when you're doing an anthology, you have to establish that yes, we are using the Oxford comma or something like that, and you've got to force some things on authors that you would normally defer to them on.
Are you pro Oxford comma or no?
I'm pro Oxford comma. Definitely.
Me too. I think when you pause, you need to tell the reader to pause. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. So where can people find you? We know you're booked up, but if someone has that breakout book that they really need your help with and want to attempt to see if you could fit it in your schedule, where would people contact you?
So the best way is to go to lonetrout.com, which will give you a little bit of background on the sorts of services provided to journals of editing, and the rates, and my contact information so you can reach out.
So what is Lone Trout all about?
Yeah, I wish there were a story behind it.
DavidGatewood.com be easier to find?
I wish I'd done that, and maybe I should change that now. I don't know, but the link is in a bunch of books now and stuff, so I think I have to leave it. There is no real story there. It was a randomly assigned username for, I think, Xbox Live or something. And so I used it, and that's why I have that there.
That's amazing.
It's such a dumb way to set up your website. So.
Well, it doesn't sound like it's hindered you at all. So, it becomes part of the mythology of David Gatewood. So that's great. David, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the show. I appreciate it.